I'm Dilek Tuna. You're watching A News. Let's take a look at the top stories. A step closer to Palestinian statehood after a UN resolution advancing peace in Gaza wins backing from the United States. US President Donald Trump withdraws support for his former ally Marjorie Taylor Greene after she calls for the so-called Epstein files to be released. And 9 people have been killed and another 29 injured in a blast at a police station in India-administered Kashmir. Good afternoon. Now, the United States, along with several countries in Asia and the Middle East, has voiced support for a UN Security Council resolution aimed at advancing peace in Gaza. The resolution is seen as a historic step toward Palestinian self-determination. Meanwhile, US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff is planning to meet with Hamas chief negotiator Khalil al-Hayya, highlighting Washington's continued involvement in efforts to resolve the conflict.
The United States, Qatar, Egypt, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, Pakistan, Jordan and Turkey have voiced their support for a UN Security Council resolution currently under discussion, drafted by Washington in coordination with regional partners. The statement highlights that the comprehensive plan to end the Gaza conflict, announced on the 29th of September and later endorsed in Sharm el-Sheikh, is being recognised as a historic step and is formally backed by the resolution. The countries stress that the process paves the way for Palestinian self-determination and statehood, describing the initiative as a genuine effort that offers a realistic path toward peace and stability, not only between Israelis and Palestinians, but for the wider region. They also expressed hope that the resolution will be adopted swiftly. Palestine welcomed this joint statement, emphasising the importance of an Israeli withdrawal from Gaza and reiterating its readiness to assume full responsibility in the territory. Meanwhile, US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff plans to meet soon with Hamas chief negotiator Khalil al-Hayya, according to a report published Friday. The date for the meeting has not been finalised.
Families sheltering makeshift tents across Gaza City are now battling a new hardship. Torrential rain that has soaked through their temporary homes, destroying what little they have left. With winter fast approaching and forecasts warning of more severe weather to come, authorities say the already dire living conditions could deteriorate even further in the days ahead.
Heavy rainwater flooded makeshift tents sheltering displaced families in Gaza City, worsening already dire living conditions and leaving bedding and belongings soaked. The Gaza municipality warned that the humanitarian situation could sharply deteriorate with the onset of winter rains, citing the collapse of sewage and water networks and widespread destruction of housing infrastructure. Families affected by the downpour woke to the rain in the middle of the night and say they have nowhere to seek shelter.
When the rainfall came in, the water started pouring in on us from the street because we're in low-lying areas and the whole camp in general is a low area, all paved. The camp was negatively affected by the rainfall. How are we supposed to cope? If in just one day, 2 hours, it was only by God's mercy on us, then what will happen if a second weather depression like this comes our way?
We thank God for the rain, but we're living in tents, under tarps. Our bedding is soaked, our clothes are soaked. Everything we have is wet. From 2 a.m. and until morning, we've been standing on our feet so that we don't drown.
Vast areas of Gaza have been reduced to wasteland by Israeli bombardment during 2 years of war that Gaza health authorities say has killed around 68,000 people. The Gaza municipality also reports that 93% of tents have either collapsed or become uninhabitable. Officials warned that without immediate delivery of relief supplies, fuel and repair equipment, the fragile sanitation and water systems could fail entirely once heavy rains continue, raising the risk of flooding and disease outbreaks.
Despite talk of progress, the situation around Gaza remains tense and layered. The US is taking on a more hands-on approach, with US Envoy Steve Witkoff planning a rare meeting with Hamas figure Khalil al-Hayya. Amid this, a major coalition of major powers from the US and Qatar to Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Jordan and Indonesia has thrown in support behind a new Security Council resolution tied to the comprehensive plan to end the Gaza conflict. A roadmap endorsed in Sharm el-Sheikh and pitched as a pathway toward Palestinian self-determination and long-term regional peace. Joining me now is Yossi Kupawasa, head of the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security from Jerusalem. Yossi, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
US Envoy Steve Witkoff is planning to meet a Hamas leader. It's a major shift. What does this signal about Washington's approach, and is this a genuine opening or simply tactical diplomacy?
No, I don't think it's a tactical diplomacy. I think meeting between Witkoff and Khalil al-Hayya is an important meeting. If it's going to happen, I'm not very happy that it does happen. But if it does, then it's an important development, because it reflects the fact that the Americans understand that they face a very important obstacle on the way to implementing the plan. Hamas doesn't want to disarm, and without the disarmament of Hamas, the entire plan is not going to be implemented. And the suffering of the people of Gaza is going to keep mounting. So I think that it's important to convince Hamas to disarm. And this is what Israel wants. This was everybody else understands that all of those very nice words about peace in the future are not going to materialize if Hamas is not going to disarm and removed from power in Gaza.
How do you assess the situation, Yossi, on the ground, despite the ceasefire in place and with broader diplomatic efforts currently underway?
The situation on the ground is that we are waiting for the completion of the implementation of the first phase of the agreement. It was supposed to be executed within 72 hours from the day that this agreement came into effect a long time ago, and it took Hamas already close to a month to implement what they were supposed to be doing in the first days. And we are still waiting for 3 bodies of deceased hostages. And once this is going to happen, and I hope soon, then we shall have to move to the next stage. And the next stage, stage B, the stage of beginning of the reconstruction and the improvement of the living conditions in Gaza, is dependent and conditioned on Hamas disarmed. And so far, these are nice words, but nothing lies behind them. Because Hamas says they refuse to do so. And the International Stabilization Force that is supposed to oversee the disarmament of Hamas is not being formed, and nobody wants to participate in a force that would have to forcibly make Hamas disarm, because they are not ready to pay the price that goes with it. So I'm not sure that we are heading in the right direction unless somebody is going to do something about Hamas disarmament. So Witkoff is trying to convince Khalil al-Hayya to disarm. We wish him luck if he is going to meet Hayya. And if not, we might have to decide between 2 other options. One is allowing reconstruction only in the areas under Israeli control in Gaza. It's more than half of the territory is under Israeli control. So we shall probably allow reconstruction to begin in these areas. According to Article 17 of the agreement, this is possible. And the other is that we shall take military action in order to remove Hamas from power by force. And nobody wants that to happen, but we might end up without any other alternative.
Okay, now you see we have a wide coalition backing the US drafted Security Council resolution from Gulf states to Turkey and Indonesia. Does this level of consensus suggest the regional mood is shifting now toward a negotiated end to the conflict?
Regional mood was always in favor of a negotiated solution to the conflict. The question is what is going to be the solution? Israel has accepted the plan that speaks about reforms in the Palestinian side that would enable us to move along a path that would lead to Palestinian self-determination, that may take the form of a statehood. But we know that under these current conditions, statehood is something, even self-determination is something very dangerous. We saw, we had a Palestinian quasi-state in Gaza, and we saw that instead of caring about the well-being of the people living there, Hamas launched an attack, terrible, barbaric attack on the 7th of October, and used the territory of the so-called Palestinian state in order to kill Israelis. If we don't make real reforms on the Palestinian side, this is what's going to happen in the future again. So we have to make sure that the reforms, as mentioned in the plan, especially the reforms that were asked from the Palestinians in the previous American plan back in 2020, which means that they would have to recognize that there is a Jewish people, that the Jewish people has a right to a state in its ancestral homeland, that they should move towards peace with this entity, with this Jewish state, and that they should recognize it as such. All of these things have to happen, and they should stop the incitement in their textbooks against the existence of Jews in this piece of land. Should stop paying salaries to terrorists. That's what they do today. They pay salaries to terrorists. Once all these reforms are going to be in place, we should be able to move towards the path, along the path that leads to Palestinian self-determination. But it's hard to see how this is all going to happen.
Okay,
Abu Mazen is speaking about all kinds of reforms, but he does nothing. And Hamas refuses to disarm. So there's a big gap between the nice dreams and the reality on the ground.
Yossi, thank you so much for joining us on the program. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Now we go to Ukraine, where among Russia's strikes on Kyiv on Friday, an Iskander missile hit the Azerbaijani embassy. Officials say repeated attacks like this raise questions about whether the strikes are deliberate, noting Azerbaijan has shared locations of all its diplomatic buildings with Russia.
Russia launched one of its largest overnight attacks on Ukraine, firing around 430 drones and 18 missiles at Kyiv. At least 6 people were killed and more than 30 injured, with damage reported across most districts of the capital. Amid the strikes, an Iskander missile hit the territory of the Azerbaijani embassy in Kyiv. The explosion resulted in the complete destruction of a part of the embassy's perimeter wall. Damage to structures, service vehicles, the administrative building, and the consular section of the embassy, as well as serious damage to the diplomatic missions compound. No casualties were reported. Hours later, Azerbaijan summoned Russia's ambassador in Baku. Officials delivered a strong protest and handed over a note verbal, saying the attack was unacceptable and violated international law. They reminded the Russian side that this was not the first incident. Baku listed previous strikes on its consulate in Kharkiv in March 2022, a Kinjal missile near the embassy in January 2024, the embassy and residence in August 2025, and Sokar oil depots in Odessa in August 2025. Officials said the repeated incidents raised serious questions about whether the strikes are deliberate, noting that Azerbaijan had shared the coordinates of all its diplomatic buildings with Russia in April 2022, and Moscow had pledged to respect them. Police, Ukraine's security service, and the prosecutor's office were on site, documenting damage and clearing debris. Embassy staff and contractors worked to replace shattered glass and secure the compound. A massive crater ripped into the ground nearby, its jagged edges and surrounding debris showing the explosion's destructive power. The blast damaged more than 5 cars, leaving one heavily wrecked, while others were hit by shrapnel, lost windows, and were covered in dust with scratches across their bodies. Buildings and homes were heavily damaged, with cracked walls and shattered windows, and glass littered the streets, showing the force of the explosions. Residents reported hearing something huge before security teams inspected the area and confirmed the strike.
We got up, I guess, somewhere around 1 a.m. In the morning, and because we heard explosion nearby, and then suddenly we heard a huge explosion out of our window, and our windows broke and just fold on us.
I thought that gonna be glass, so I tried to cover the baby just to save him from the glass.
The United Nations condemned the overnight strikes, noting deaths in Kyiv and Chornomorsk and damage to the Azerbaijani embassy. It said attacks on civilians and civilian infrastructure are unacceptable and called for a full, immediate, and unconditional ceasefire as a first step toward lasting peace in Ukraine. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky called Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev to condemn the embassy strike and thank Azerbaijan for its humanitarian support. President Aliyev said attacks on diplomatic missions cannot be justified. Across Kyiv, emergency crews say more than 40 people were rescued last night, as fires and destruction were reported citywide.
Meanwhile, Russia's attacks on Ukraine's energy system are intensifying as winter approaches, leaving many communities without power. At the same time, Ukrainian workers continue repairing damaged plants, keeping electricity flowing despite ongoing strikes and safety risks.
Russia has targeted Ukraine's energy facilities since the start of the war. Inside one thermal power plant, the impact of these strikes is visible. Equipment is broken or rusted, concrete walls are full of holes, and twisted metal sticks out toward the open sky. The smell of burnt machinery still lingers after one of the largest drone and missile strikes to hit the plant. Workers move through the large facility, clearing rubble, putting together metal parts, and fixing damaged equipment. The work is constant, as attacks have become a regular part of their jobs. Outside, pieces of destroyed drones are collected, evidence of the continuing conflict.
It's impossible to get used to strikes, bombardments, missiles, and drones flying around. No, it is impossible to get used to it. I don't know what kind of superhero one should be, but I think my guys are superheroes because they stayed together, united, did their jobs, and supported one another. Even when strikes happened and we had to hide under the boiler because we could not go to the shelter as we were at work, we supported each other and cheered each other up. We were together.
Attacks on power plants, electricity networks and gas systems intensified in October again, causing widespread outages and endangering civilians, the United Nations monitoring mission in Ukraine reported. 3 major strikes last month alone disrupted power across many regions, and November has seen no relief as new attacks hit the country's energy grid. Strikes on power plants, electricity lines and gas facilities have left many people in darkness and cold. Early Friday attacks killed at least 8 people in Kyiv and the Odessa region, highlighting both the human and technical toll of the war. At the same time, Ukraine faces internal challenges in its energy sector. The country's Anti-Corruption Bureau has launched a wide-ranging investigation into alleged kickback schemes within the state nuclear power company, reportedly involving $100 million, adding another layer of pressure to an already strained system.
A fire at an industrial complex on the outskirts of Buenos Aires on Friday night triggered a powerful explosion, though no fatalities have been reported so far. The blast occurred at 3 buildings storing agrochemical products. Fire crews are working to bring the blaze under control. The cause of the fire has yet to be determined, and only minor injuries have been reported in nearby homes. Spanish Coast Guard teams rescued 57 migrants from a wooden boat near Gran Canaria. Rescue units also recovered another 377 people from 2 vessels near El Hierro in the Canary Islands. Arrivals to the Canary Islands have dropped by nearly half this year, officials say, after record numbers in 2024. But the Atlantic crossing remains one of the world's most dangerous migration routes, with rough seas and fragile boats putting lives at risk. Looking ahead, EU officials plan to provide extra support to frontline countries once the bloc's new migration and asylum pact comes into effect next year. Donald Trump has said that he intends to sue the BBC next week for up to $5 billion, claiming the broadcaster wrongly edited a clip of one of his speeches. The BBC has apologised and admitted the edit was a mistake and says it will not broadcast the documentary again. Yet it maintains that Trump has no grounds for a defamation case.
Well, we'll sue them. We'll sue them for anywhere between $1 billion and $5 billion, probably sometime next week. See, well, I think I have to do it. I mean, they've even admitted that they cheated. I mean, not that they couldn't have not done that. They cheated. They changed the words coming out of my mouth.
US President Donald Trump has withdrawn his support for Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, one of his most loyal MAGA allies. Their split comes as Greene pushes for the release of Jeffrey Epstein's files, a move that Trump now calls a political hoax.
US President Donald Trump has withdrawn his endorsement of Marjorie Taylor Greene, saying he would back a challenger against her in Georgia. He accused her of changing politically and claimed she had turned against his agenda. Greene is a far-right Republican and one of Trump's most visible MAGA loyalists. She has spent years defending him, campaigning for him, and promoting his policies in Congress. Their feud erupted after she signed a petition forcing a vote on releasing all Epstein files. Trump has called the effort a hoax and said Democrats are using the scandal to attack him, after thousands of pages mentioning high-profile figures, including himself, were released this week.
They can have whatever they want. They already do. I think they have 50,000 pages already. Look, this is a Democrat hoax. This is a hoax put out by the Democrat, and a few Republicans have gone along with it because they're weak and ineffective. But this is a Democrat hoax to get away from the fact that they just lost the shutdown and they've lost the elections. They've lost the big election, to me, in a record number.
Greene rejected the accusation and said Trump was targeting her to warn other Republicans ahead of the expected vote on the files. She publicly released messages showing she had pressed the White House to disclose any material it holds on Epstein. The controversy has grown as both parties release selective batches of documents to shape the political narrative. Democrats say the latest emails raise questions about Trump's past ties to Epstein, while Republicans accuse them of cherry-picking and have released more than 20,000 pages of related records. The Justice Department has now agreed to examine Epstein's associations with several prominent figures, including political donor Reid Hoffman and former President Bill Clinton. Though none have been accused of criminal involvement, Trump keeps insisting that he was never on Epstein's island and has denied all wrongdoing. But his name has reappeared in newly released court documents, including old photographs, guest logs, and email references involving Epstein's social circles.
Chileans vote on Sunday in their first compulsory election since 2012. Alongside choosing a new president, they'll also renew much of Congress, a result that could shift the country's political direction. The race is split between a left-wing frontrunner and several right-wing and libertarian challengers. With no clear majority expected, a runoff in December looks likely.
Chileans are heading to the polls on Sunday for a presidential election, marking the first mandatory vote since 2012. Around 15 to 16 million citizens are eligible to vote, including a large number of first-time and younger voters. Citizens who fail to vote without a valid excuse face fines. The presidential election comes alongside a full renewal of the 155-member lower house of Congress and 23 of the 50 Senate seats. The outcome could reshape Chile's legislative balance and influence future constitutional reforms. The presidential race pits the governing leftist coalition against a field of right-wing and libertarian candidates. Leading the polls is Janet Jara of the Communist Party, representing the leftist coalition. Her campaign focuses on labor rights, security, and expanding Chile's lithium and copper industries. Right-wing candidates include José Antonio Cast, a former three-time presidential contender, emphasizing immigration controls and security. Johannes Kaiser, a libertarian candidate advocating border closures, state spending cuts, and leaving the Paris Agreement. And Evelyn Matei, a moderate conservative and former Labour minister with a focus on economic and security issues. crime and immigration have emerged as key voter concerns in the campaign. Analysts note that younger voters are seen as unpredictable, less ideological, and more focused on practical issues. The election follows a history of low voter turnout in Chile. In the first round of the 2021 presidential election, the abstention rate was 53%. The mandatory vote is intended to increase participation, particularly among younger generations. Experts suggest that no candidate is expected to secure an outright majority, which is likely to trigger a runoff on the 14th of December. The legislative vote could also reshape Chile's Congress. If right-wing candidates win the presidency and secure majorities in both chambers, it would mark the first time since the end of the Pinochet's rule in 1990 that the right controls the executive and legislative branches, potentially enabling significant policy or constitutional changes.
Berlin is taking a closer look at its economic ties with China as new export restrictions highlight risks for key German industries. A government-appointed commission will now evaluate long-term supply needs and propose steps to reduce dependence on critical materials. Here's our Manur Maktoum. She's in Beijing with more.
Germany has launched a formal re-evaluation of its trade policy towards China after recent rare earth export restrictions exposed critical vulnerabilities in Europe's largest industrial economy. A new expert commission has been established comprising academics, industry experts and security specialists to reassess how deeply Germany should rely on China for strategic materials and technologies. The move shows increasing concern in Berlin that supply chains for key sectors such as electric vehicles, electronics, and renewable energy are overly dependent on Chinese raw materials, especially rare earths that are essential for motors, batteries, and advanced manufacturing. The decision shows a shift from Germany's earlier de-risking approach, which sought to reduce exposure to China without disrupting trade, but had limited impact. Beijing maintains the measures are routine and national security controls on dual-use goods, but the resulting licensing delays and uncertainty have fueled anxiety across Europe. The expert commission will now provide regular assessments and recommend policy adjustments, including diversifying critical mineral imports and strengthening EU-level supply chains. Manu Maktoum, A News, Beijing.
COP30 delegates in Brazilian Belém remain split over finance, adaptation and fossil fuel commitments as they work toward a final deal. Outside the venue, Indigenous groups held a peaceful sit-in calling for stronger protection of the Amazon and later met with COP30 President André Correa do Lago. Delegates say progress is being made in several technical areas, but key decisions will depend on ministers when they arrive next week.
Upholding them is our common mission, a mission that begins.
During the summit, Azerbaijan presented its latest urban and climate priorities, building on initiatives launched at COP29 in Baku. The key update was the Baku Sustainability Coalition, now moving into a formal operational phase. Anar Guliev spoke to A News on the sidelines of the summit.
At COP29 in Baku, we launched the Multi-Level Action Pathway Initiative, which led to the creation of the Baku Sustainability Coalition, together with Egypt, the UAE and Brazil. Here at COP30, we are holding its first institutional meeting. The Coalition's charter has been submitted to member states, and we will now open it to all countries that have hosted COP or the World Urban Forum.
At least 9 people have been killed after confiscated explosives accidentally detonated inside a police station in Indian-administered Kashmir. Nearly 30 others were injured, most of them police officers and forensic staff who were examining the material.
At least 9 people have been killed and nearly 30 others injured after a stockpile of confiscated explosives accidentally detonated inside a police station in Nogam, in Indian-administered Kashmir. Police say the blast happened late on Friday night, while forensic teams were examining the seized material. Most of the victims were police officers and specialists working inside the compound. Several of the injured remain in critical condition.
There was an explosion and we got scared. When we reached, we saw everything devastated. A lot of smoke, dead bodies and displaced body parts. May God save them all.
Officials say the explosion tore through the building, setting parts of the station on fire and forcing emergency teams to evacuate the wounded to nearby hospitals.
In this unfortunate incident, 9 people have lost their lives, 27 police personnel, 2 revenue officials and 3 civilians from the adjacent areas have received injuries. The sampling process, the handling was being done with extreme caution, with utmost caution by the FSL team. However, unfortunately, during this course, last night around 11:20 p.m., an accidental explosion has taken place. Any other speculation into the cause of this incident is unnecessary.
The blast comes just days after a deadly car explosion in New Delhi killed 8 people, heightening concerns about safety and security across India. Authorities in Kashmir say an investigation into how the explosives ignited is now underway.
Energy ministers from Azerbaijan, Georgia, Hungary and Romania met in Tbilisi to discuss the Caspian, Black Sea and Europe Green Energy Corridor. They said the detailed study needed to move the project forward will be finished by early 2026. The project has also been added to a key European network plan, an important step that could help it receive official EU support. The ministers also agreed to connect this project with a separate plan to lay a long electricity cable under the Black Sea, and said the next stage will focus on preparing the project for investment and construction. A fragile ceasefire between Afghanistan and Pakistan is holding, but tensions remain dangerously high. Pakistan is now accusing Afghan nationals of carrying out 2 deadly suicide attacks on its soil this week. Our correspondent Tamim Bahis has more from Kabul.
Pakistan's Interior Minister Mohsin Naqvi told Parliament on Thursday that Afghan nationals were behind both attacks. One targeting a courthouse in Islamabad on Tuesday and another hitting a military school near the Afghan border a day earlier. He called the alleged involvement of Afghans a major serious concern and repeated accusations that Kabul is supporting Islamist groups operating inside Pakistan. But Kabul has rejected those claims. Spokesperson Zabiullah Mujahid told Reuters that Kabul does not harbour Pakistani militants and insisted Afghan forces have themselves detained or killed Pakistani nationals during operations against Islamic State militants. He added that individual suspects do not represent the entire Pakistani nation nor its government. Tuesday's bombing in Islamabad killed at least 12 people and wounded 27 when a suicide attacker detonated explosives close to a police patrol outside a lower court. On Monday, another bomber rammed a vehicle packed with explosives into the main gate of a military school in South Waziristan, killing 3. Relations between the neighbours have deteriorated sharply in recent years. Just last month, dozens of soldiers and civilians were killed in border clashes, underscoring how volatile the situation remains. For now, the ceasefire continues, but both sides trading accusations. The path to lasting stability appears uncertain. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
Central Asian leaders will meet in Tashkent this week for the 7th consultative meeting of heads of state, aiming to adopt new agreements to deepen regional cooperation. The summit brings together the presidents of Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan and Turkmenistan, with Azerbaijan attending as a guest of honour. Uzbekistan's President Shavkat Mirziyoyev says the format has become a key mechanism for building trust, resolving border disputes and developing joint water and energy projects. The leaders are expected to discuss regional connectivity, economic integration and cooperation with Afghanistan as Central Asia's trade and investment ties continue to expand. Now, in Uzbekistan's capital, leaders from Azerbaijan and the Central Asian states have gathered for a high-level summit aimed at deepening political and economic and transport cooperation across the heart of Eurasia. Now, with the Middle Corridor gaining momentum, energy connectivity expanding and regional security high on the agenda, the meeting in Tashkent reflects how rapidly ties are strengthening between Baku and the broader Central Asian region. It's a moment that underscores shifting power dynamics and growing regional confidence. And joining me to unpack now is Richard Spooner, member of the advisory board at the Caspian Policy Centre from Astana, Kazakhstan. Richard, thank you for joining us on the program.
My pleasure to be with you today.
Now, how significant is this summit in terms of political alignment between Azerbaijan and the Central Asian states? Does it mark a new phase of regional coordination, do you think?
I think it's part of a process that's going on now for the last few years. Of course, the key issue there is developing the Middle Corridor. That's what has brought Azerbaijan and Central Asia closer. This is the third consecutive meeting of the Central Asian heads of state where President Aliyev has participated. It just makes a lot of sense. In fact, the Caspian Policy Center has suggested that C5+1 should become C6+1, including Azerbaijan. And before the recent summit of Central Asian nations in Washington, President Tokayev suggested the same thing, that the Americans invite Azerbaijan for the summit on November 6th. So there's a lot of momentum there. And as I said, it just makes a lot of sense. For all the countries that want to see the Middle Corridor grow its capacity and improve its efficiency so that it can be, the crucial link in supply chains, infrastructure for transportation between East and West. It's very good indeed to see Azerbaijan and Central Asia together.
Okay, and Azerbaijan has increasingly positioned itself as a bridge between Central Asia and global markets. What role is Baku expected to play in shaping the outcomes of this summit, Richard?
I think that, given that Baku is really the key pivot in the Middle Corridor, I think their role is very important, because without Baku, Central Asia can't reach Europe the same way. Therefore, having Baku there, having President Aliyev participate in the decisions that we'll hear about probably tomorrow, is crucial.
And energy cooperation is a key pillar between these countries, as you mentioned earlier. Are we likely to see new agreements or frameworks emerging from Tashkent that could reshape regional energy routes?
I think there will be announcements about energy, about transportation and logistics. Logistics is very important because the countries along the Middle Corridor do need to harmonize their border procedures and develop common digital platforms for doing that. So we will see what's announced tomorrow. And then, of course, we'll have to look and see what's announced. Are these commitments? Are these obligations? Are they roadmaps, maybe? Or are they even less definite? The more definite they are, obviously, the better that will be for the development of these projects and for the goals that everybody along the Middle Corridor is setting.
Okay, now lastly, Richard, we also know that cooperation with Afghanistan is on the table during talks in the summit. What's your analysis on that, and what outcomes do you think can be expected, or what are some of the intended outcomes as well?
I think that that's an issue that Uzbekistan is taking the lead on among the Central Asian countries. They've already normalized relations, and Central Asia, other Central Asian countries are also gradually developing relationships with the government in Kabul. Specifically, of course, there's always the possibility of a pipeline going through Afghanistan to Pakistan and India, the TAPI pipeline, as it's called. It's had a long story, and the Afghans, in fact, have even been building their section recently. It's going to require agreement, though, with the other countries involved. That, of course, would be a big piece of news if there anything were to happen on that pipeline. Beyond that, I think it's just increasing trade. And again, Uzbekistan will be taking the lead there. I think that they'll probably have some bilateral talks with the Afghans, and we'll see if anything is announced this weekend.
Okay. Richard, thank you so much for joining us on the program. Thank you for your insight and time.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.
You're up to date with world news for the hour. Thank you for watching and stay tuned to A News.